This is Grand Central Terminal. It sits right here on 42nd Street, right in the middle of Park Avenue. Because of this, traffic flows around it. Grand Central was built at the height of train travel and played a huge role in moving the central hub of the city northward to the middle of the island of Manhattan. In this lesson, I'm going to tell you all about Grand Central and the fight that was won to keep it. The shining star of this train station is visible the moment you walk in. This big, beautiful open space and this impressive painted ceiling with constellations illuminating it. It's breathtaking and worth a visit just for this main room. But when you're here, remember that this station is way more than just this massive room.
Grand Central extends almost 9 stories beneath me and accommodates dozens and dozens of tracks, making it one of the largest train terminals in the world. In addition to being a train terminal, it's also a subway stop on the New York subway. So often it's referred to as Grand Central Station, but technically it's Grand Central Terminal. The difference being that trains go through a station and end at a terminal. So you'll hear it be called a station, but it's technically a terminal. And if this is confusing to you, just call it Grand Central. This structure was not the first to stand here serving the trains in this area. This entire avenue, Park Avenue, used to be filled just with train lines.
And early on, this spot became a train yard. It wasn't until the 1890s that the tracks running the length of this entire road were covered up and it was turned into the Park Avenue that we know today.
Before we get more into Grand Central, I want to take a minute and talk about another transit hub, Penn Station. Today, Penn Station is notoriously sucky to travel through. The ceilings are low, the lights are dim, it's really drabby, and it's really easy to start feeling claustrophobic.
But it hasn't always been like this. Look at what it used to be.
Penn Station used to be really pretty, like really pretty.
It was one of the most beautiful buildings in Manhattan. Just look at these photos.
As of 2020, they rebuilt part of it called Moynihan Hall, and it's a little bit better than it used to be, but it's still no Grand Central.
Today, all the trains here are government operated by the Metropolitan Transit Authority, or MTA. But in the mid-1800s, when people were just beginning to build these train lines, all of them were privately owned and operated. So Grand Central was built as a competitor to Penn Station, with each of the railroad owners competing for more traffic through their transit hub. Around the same time workers were building Grand Central, the Pennsylvania Railroad Company was building train tunnels under the Hudson River. These trains were bringing in passengers from New Jersey and beyond, and they were pulling into this beautiful station on the west side of Manhattan, Pennsylvania Station. Remember that this was at a time when train travel was the way to get around, but that soon changed. Shortly after these two stations were built, air travel began to take over. Also, the freeway system began to expand across the entire United States. That meant that a lot fewer people were using these trains, and eventually this beautiful edifice was moved underground so that the land, the real estate, could be used for something else. When the old Penn Station was torn apart, it was considered a massive loss for the history of the city. But because such a beautiful building was destroyed, that sparked a movement that helped to prevent other beautiful buildings from meeting that same fate. After the original Penn Station was destroyed, real estate developers put a target on Grand Central's back because it was only several stories tall and the airspace above it was growing in value as a skyscraper would be much more profitable to have in this spot. Proposals were made for destroying Grand Central or even building on top of it. Look at what almost could have been. But the city stepped in and said no. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, wife of the former US president, famously helped advocate for the building's preservation. A case was opened between those trying to tear down Grand Central and those trying to preserve it. And this case was eventually taken all the way to the Supreme Court. They ruled in favor of preserving Grand Central. So you and I get to go and enjoy it today. Thank goodness.
And the reason there was so much pushback against destroying the building is because it's such a visible New York landmark. Hundreds of thousands of people pass through this every day, and not just commuting. People come here specifically to see Grand Central.
During World War II, the city painted the windows black so that it would be less viewable from the sky and less of a target to potential bombers. Also, during the space race of the 1960s, the US government placed a massive rocket in this central hall to get people excited to go to space.
CBS used to have broadcasting offices in here, making it really common for them to display big national events in here.
For example, when John Glenn orbited the moon in 1962, it was broadcast right here.
There's actually still a hole you can see in the ceiling from where they mounted the rocket.
People love this building. As you walk through this vast structure, make sure to look up in the main concourse at the turquoise ceiling with constellations painted on it, with these gold lines that represent the sun's path in the sky throughout the seasons. In the center of the concourse, make sure to get a good look at this brass clock right above the info desk. This iconic clock is said to be worth as much as $20 million. It's featured in many popular movies like this 1990s movie, The Fisher King, where the clock turns into a disco ball. Head to the lower floor to this hallway with the tile ceiling, and you'll notice that sound waves travel differently down here. This is called the Whispering Gallery, because the curvature creates an acoustic oddity that allows you to whisper and be heard from super far away, even with the bustle of the city. There's even a museum in here where you can see miniature trains and models of the city. Grand Central also has a food court on the lower level if you want to grab lunch. Overall, it's worth taking an hour or two to wander around this beautiful structure and take it all in, and to consider that this was very close to being destroyed. But luckily for us, it wasn't.
In the next lesson, we're going to head just a couple blocks north to one of the most recognizable parks in the world, Central Park.